I did study that.
Yeah, you can find one.
I do that a lot. You had to go to work? I wish it would snow tomorrow, too.
And tomorrow's supposed to be small.
I hope maybe the field can grow.
My children.
2 days. Maybe Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay, so today we'll start a new system, the respiratory system, one of the important systems in our body. First, we'll see what are the parts of the respiratory system. Then we'll talk about the processes of respiration. There are 4 processes of respiration. We'll see what are those processes of respiration. Then we'll talk about the first organ, the uppermost organ of the respiratory system is the nose. So we'll talk about the nose, the first organ of the respiratory system. Then we'll talk about the pharynx and larynx, those 2 organs of the respiratory system. Then we'll talk about the respiratory membrane. What is the respiratory membrane? It is the membrane through which the exchange of gas between the blood and the lung, alveoli of the lung, takes place. So that is the respiratory membrane. We'll see the structure of a respiratory membrane. Then we'll talk about the coverings of your lung. You know that heart has connective tissue coverings, right? Pericardium. Lung also has connective tissue coverings, and the connective tissue coverings of the lung is called pleura. We'll see the layers of the pleura, and then we'll talk about the mechanisms of respiration, how the inhalation and exhalation, taking the air and exhaling the air out, those processes occur or take place. Then we'll talk about surfactant. Surfactant is a fluid present in the alveoli. Alveoli are the tiny balls inside the lung. Lung are filled with alveoli, small air balls, okay? And in the inner wall of the alveoli, we have a fluid. That fluid is called surfactant. We'll see why surfactant is there, okay? So first, important parts of the respiratory system, or anatomy of the respiratory system. Major organs, if you start from the uppermost and go down, nose is the first organ or uppermost organ of the respiratory system. Inside the nose, you will see a cavity that is called nasal cavity. Nasal cavity is divided by a septum, nasal septum, that divides the whole cavity into how many parts? 2 parts, okay? So that's the nasal cavity, and around the nasal cavity we have paranasal sinuses. Para means around the nasal cavity, paranasal sinuses. Sinuses are the air-filled spaces or cavities in the bones. Then next to the nose is the pharynx. Pharynx is a muscular tube. Then next to the pharynx is the larynx. Larynx is mainly formed by cartilages. Okay? And then trachea. Trachea is also called air tube. It is also mainly a cartilaginous tube. Okay? Then the lower end of trachea divides into 2 bronchi, right and left, main bronchi. So lower end of trachea divides into right and left bronchi. Bronchi indicates more than 1, right? If you see bronchus, C-U-S, that indicates 1. We have 2 bronchi, that's why we say bronchi, 2, right and left. Then the bronchi enter into the lung. So after the trachea divides into right and left bronchi, those bronchi enter into the lung and divide further into many small and small branches. Okay, so bronchi and their branches, and the last organ of your respiratory system are the lungs. So lungs are the last organs or terminal organs of the respiratory system. Make sense? So lungs are the last organs. And how many lungs we have? 2 lungs. And lungs are heavily filled with very small air balls. Those small air balls, tiny air balls, fill the lung, and those are called alveoli. Okay, so your lungs are filled with small air balls. Those are called the alveoli. So those are the parts of the respiratory system. So in this picture, you can see those structures. So nose, inside the nose we have nasal cavity, and then pharynx, then the larynx, then the trachea. This part is the larynx, the cartilages, and this part is muscular. Pharynx is muscular, and larynx is cartilaginous, most mainly, and then trachea, also mainly cartilaginous structure, air tube, and then it divides into bronchi, right and left, and they enter into the lungs and divide further. They didn't show further division here, but inside the lung, the bronchi divides again and again, and the last organ are the organs of the lungs. Okay, here how the bronchi, after they enter into the lung, how they divide. So the lower end of trachea divides into right and left bronchi. Those are called primary or main or principal. Different books say differently. Primary, main or principal. Same thing. Bronchi. How many? 2, right? Right and left. And the area through which the bronchi enter into the lung, that indented area or indentation in the lung is called hilum. Okay? So hilum is the area, indentation or area through which the bronchi enter into the lung. Right main bronchus is wider and shorter and more vertical than the left. So there is some differences. There are some differences between right and left principal or primary bronchi. The right one is wider, shorter, and more vertical than the left. Then inside the lung, the bronchi will divide into secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, then bronchioles, and then terminal bronchioles. So the bronchi will divide again and again inside the lung. What are those divisions? First branches are secondary bronchi, then secondary bronchi will divide further, will form the tertiary bronchi. Tertiary bronchi will branch and form bronchioles. Okay? The bronchioles are less than 1 millimeter in diameter. Okay? So the diameter of bronchioles is less than 1 millimeter. And then the bronchiole will divide further and form the terminal bronchioles. And terminal bronchioles, terminal means last, right? Terminal indicates the end or last. So terminal bronchioles are the last bronchioles, and those are very narrow, less than 0.5 millimeter in diameter. Okay. So here you see the trachea, and lower end of trachea has divided into primary bronchi. Now, if you see the differences, the left one is longer than the right one. Right one is shorter as well as wider. Okay, so right one is wider and more vertical. So if you see, this picture is not very clear, but if you see this is the trachea, and this is the right one. Right one is shorter, wider, and more vertical. Left one is longer, narrower, and less vertical. Make sense? So this is the right lung here. This is your left lung. So this one is shorter, wider, and more vertical. This one is more horizontal and narrow. Now inside the lung, you see the secondary bronchus, then the tertiary bronchus, and they did not show the terminal one here. They didn't show. Okay, now functionally we can divide the respiratory tract or system into two parts. What are those two functional parts? Conducting zone and respiratory zone. So functionally we divide the respiratory tract into two areas: conducting zone and respiratory zone. Respiratory zone is also called gas exchange zone, and conducting zone only transmit or move the gas from one place to another place. So through the conducting part only gas will go from one place to another place. No exchange will occur in the wall of the conducting part. But in the wall of the respiratory part, what will happen? The gas exchange will occur. Gas exchange means gas exchange between what? Between the blood and the respiratory system, right? So between the blood and the respiratory system, through the wall of the respiratory zone or gas exchange zone, the gas exchange between the blood and the respiratory system will take place. Okay, now we'll talk about the first organ of the respiratory system. The first organ is the nose. Nose has two parts. Only a small part of our nose we can see from outside. That's the external nose. But most part of the nose is inside. We don't see from outside. That is the nasal cavity. So nasal cavity is the inside part that we cannot see from outside. Now, functions of nose. Nose performs a number of important functions. What are those? Motions and warms the entering air. So the air we inhale, while the air passes through the nose, nasal cavity, the air gets warm and moist. Filters and cleans inspired air. The air we inhale, we know that inside the nose we have hair, and here they block some large dark particles, and also inside the nasal cavity the surface is sticky. You all know that, right? That sticky surface will trap the dart, small dart particles will get attached to the sticky surface and will be stopped there. Okay? So by two ways your nose filter and clean the inspired air. One is because of the presence of air inside the nose, large particles will be blocked, and because of the stickiness of the surface, inner surface of the nasal cavity, small dart particles will get attached there. Serves as a resonating chamber for speech. Your nose resonates the sound and increase the quality of sound, improves the quality of sound. And if you block your nose and talk, then you will see the sound will be different, right? You all know that if you block your nose and talk, then your sound will be different. So nose plays an important role in improving the quality of sound. Also, paranasal sinuses. You know that around the nose we have paranasal sinuses. Those help in the production of sound. smell and taste are also improved by your nose. Not improved, you smell through your nose, and the taste is also related to the nose. The reason is, some taste receptors are in the inner part of your nose. There are some taste receptors in the inner part of your nose. And inside the nose, you have olfactory receptors, smell receptors. So those receptors help in smelling. And in the back part of your nose, you have taste receptors, few taste receptors. But another thing is important, your nose, how it helps the taste of the food, because you know that if you don't smell the food, the taste will not be perfect, right? When you get cold, you don't smell, and you can tell that the taste of the food is not as good as when your nose is open, right? So the smell and taste join together to improve the taste. So those are the important functions of your nose. Nasal cavity inside and posterior to the external nose, divided by a septum that is called the nasal septum, and from the lateral side of your nose, 3 shelf-like structures go inwards. So if this is the lateral wall of your nose, from the inner side of your lateral wall of your nose, 3 shelves get out like this. Those are called concave. So superior concave, middle concave, and inferior nasal concave. Those are like the shelves. Okay, roof of nasal cavity is formed by ethmoid and sphenoid. Those 2 bones form the roof of your nose. And then the floor of your nose is formed by the soft and hard palates. So basically, palate is the floor of your nose. If you put your finger inside your mouth and move up, that is the palate, right? You can touch the palate. With your tongue, you can touch the palate. And that palate separates your nose, nasal cavity above, and below is the oral cavity, right? Those 2 cavities are separated by the palate. And palate has how many parts? 2 parts. The hard part and soft part. Hard part is formed by the bones, because it is hard, right? And soft part is formed by the muscle. And inner lining or layer of the nasal cavity is called the respiratory mucosa. So mucosa is the innermost lining. So here you see inside the nose, this is the lateral wall of the nose, nasal cavity. So you can see 3 concave. And concave are separated by vestibule. Okay? Meatus. Meatuses. There are 3 meatuses. Those are kind of folds going inwards, and those folds are called meatuses. Okay? Superior, middle, and inferior meatuses. They separate superior, middle, inferior, concave. Concave are the shelves. Okay. Now, if you see the roof of nasal cavity, you see roof is formed by bones. 2 bones form the roof, as I have mentioned. Anteriorly, that's the ethmoid bone, cribriform plate of ethmoid bone, and the posterior part is formed by the sphenoid bone, that flying butterfly or bat-shaped bone. Now, cribriform plate of ethmoid has many holes. Probably you remember from NP1, cribriform plate of ethmoid has many holes, right? Those are called olfactory foramina. Olfactory nerve fibers, smell nerve fibers that will carry the smell signal will pass through the cribriform plate, olfactory foramina of the cribriform plate. Okay, now the floor of the nasal cavity is formed by the palate. So this is the palate, you see here, that separates the nasal cavity above and oral cavity below. And the palate has two parts. The front part is hard, formed by bone, that is the hard palate, and the back part is formed by skeletal muscle. Remember, this muscle is skeletal muscle, the soft palate. Okay.
Professor,
Yes.
for the floor, is that maxillary?
Two bones form the floor.
The floor as well is formed by two separate bones?
Mhm.
Okay.
Palatine bone and maxillary bone. Okay. So the floor, hard part of the floor is formed by bones, right? That bony part is formed by two bones, the maxillary bone and palatine bone. Okay. Respiratory mucosa, the inner layer of the nasal cavity is the respiratory mucosa, and the epithelial lining there is the pseudostratified columnar epithelium. And you know that pseudostratified columnar epithelium, the cells have what? Cilia. That's why they are also called pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, right? Cilia are like soft hair-like structures. They move or beat like this. Okay. Mucus and serous secretions contain lysozyme and defensive. Those two chemicals are secreted from the cells in the respiratory mucosa. Okay. So in the respiratory mucosa, we have pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, as well as we have some secretory cells. Those cells will secrete what? Mucus and serous type secretions. Okay. Mucus is sticky secretion and serous secretion is more watery. Okay. So more water-like secretion is the serous secretion and more sticky secretion is the mucus. Those two types of secretion occur, and those secretions contain two important chemicals, lysozyme and defensive. Both have antimicrobial actions. So both have antimicrobial actions or properties. So they can inactivate or kill the microorganisms. Cilia move contaminated mucus posteriorly to throat. You know that the cilia, they move like this, right? And all of them move synchronously, simultaneously like this, okay? In same direction, they will move at the same time. Not like one is moving in opposite direction than the other. They all will move at the same time in same direction. That will create like millions, right? So that will create huge pressure or power, and that power will push the mucus backwards towards the throat. Inspired air is warmed by plexuses of capillaries and veins. So in the wall of your nasal cavity, you have capillary plexuses and veins, right? And those blood vessels make the inspired air warm. When you inhale, those blood vessels are in the wall of the nasal cavity, right? So they will make the inspired air warm. Sensory nerve endings are present in the wall of the nasal cavity in high density. That's why if you put something inside your nasal cavity, you feel right very sensitive. That area is very extremely sensitive, right? Why? Because we have many sensory nerve endings are there. In other parts, we don't have that many. That's why other areas are not that sensitive. But if you put something inside your nose, you can tell very extremely sensitive the wall of the nasal cavity because of the presence of many sensory nerve endings, and that triggers sneezing, and that is very helpful because if any irritating chemical or any particle goes in your nose, then that initiates the sneezing, right? And that is actually a defensive function of your body. Otherwise, it will harm and go inside your body.
Does it mean like when you breathe through your mouth, it's a very high risk of
Yes,
getting sick?
exactly, yes. Your mouth is not that sensitive, right? So it will not be able to tell. Sneeze produces very powerful pressure, right? Outward pressure of air. Very strongly the air comes out, right? So that throws everything out. Nasal cavity, inside the nasal cavity you have those shelf-like structures, 3 in each side from the lateral wall. Those are called concave. And why the concave are there? They increase the surface area. Make sense? If you just make those 3 straight, flat, then the total surface area will be bigger, right? So to increase the surface area inside the nasal cavity, those concave are there. Okay, now we'll talk about the processes of respiration. Respiration has 4 processes. Very important, 4 processes. What are those? First is pulmonary ventilation. Pulmonary ventilation is nothing but breathing. Okay, very simple, breathing. So pulmonary ventilation is the breathing, and breathing has 2 phases. You all know that, inhalation and exhalation. Inhalation is what? Taking the air in, and exhalation is expelling or throwing the air outside, to the outside. So those 2 are the pulmonary parts of pulmonary ventilation. Then external respiration. After you inhale the air goes where? Inside the lung. Inside the lung. And what happens inside the lung? Inside the lung, your blood goes to the lung, right? You know that from the heart, deoxygenated blood is going to the lung to get oxygen, right? So exchange of gas takes place between the blood and the alveoli of the lung through the respiratory membrane. So that is the external respiration. So external, I am repeating again, external respiration takes place where? Inside the lung. What is that? The exchange of gas. Just know that the exchange of gases inside the lung, that is the external respiration. Then what happens in the lung? Your blood gets what? Your blood gets oxygen, and your blood delivers carbon dioxide to the lung, right? So same time, 2 things will happen inside the lung in external respiration. Your blood is going there to get the oxygen, and deoxygenated blood is going to the lung to do what? Give the carbon dioxide to the lung. Make sense? So, deoxygenated blood is going to the lung to get the oxygen and give the carbon dioxide to the alveoli of the lung. So that's the external respiration. Then transport. Oxygen and carbon dioxide, those chemicals or gases are transported throughout the body. Your blood will take the oxygen to the tissues and will give the oxygen to the tissues, because our tissues need oxygen. And your blood will get the carbon dioxide from the tissue, right? So we give the oxygen and get the carbon dioxide from the tissue, and then transport inside the blood vessels. And then internal respiration. Internal respiration occurs in tissues, rest of the body, not in the lung, rest of the body. What is that? The exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the blood vessels and tissues. So just know that pulmonary ventilation is breathing. Breathing has how many phases? 2. Inspiration and expiration. Inhalation and exhalation, right? That's the pulmonary ventilation. Okay. Then next, inside the lung, external respiration takes place. Okay? Inside the lung, external respiration takes place. You know what happens inside the lung, right? Blood gets oxygen and releases carbon dioxide. And then the blood transports the gases throughout the body. And then in the tissues, what happens? Internal respiration takes place in all tissues of our body. And that is what your tissues get oxygen from the blood and gives carbon dioxide to the blood. Make sense? So that is the internal respiration. If I ask you just a critical question that internal respiration, does it take place in the lung? Okay. So see one thing. It's like your heart. What your heart does? Distribute the blood throughout the body, right? Your heart distributes the blood throughout the body. But heart needs blood for its own survival, right? So similarly, the lung, what happens in the lung? We know that gas exchange, internal respiration takes place in the lung. Gas exchange takes place in the lung. But lung tissue needs oxygen from the blood. Lung tissue needs blood for oxygen. So we can say that internal respiration takes place everywhere in all tissues of your body, because lung tissue also metabolism occurs there, right? Carbon dioxide is produced in the tissue. Okay?
So external is only in the lung.
External is only in the lung,
And
but internal everywhere. Okay? That's all tissues. That's kind of critical. Okay? So those are the 4 processes of respiration. Now, first 2 processes of respiration take place in the respiratory system, within the respiratory system, because we know that inhalation, exhalation, that's the function of your respiratory system, right? Blood is not related to that. You are taking air inside your body and exhaling the air out. And also the external respiration that takes place between the blood and the lung, alveoli of the lung. Those 2 occurs in the respiratory system. Then other 2 take place in the circulatory system, because we know that blood is a part of the circulatory system that transports the gases, and internal respiration. Respiratory system is not involved in that, right? It happens in all tissues of the body. Okay, now after your nose, the next organ of the respiratory system is the pharynx. Pharynx is a muscular tube, extends from the nasal cavity above and larynx and just say larynx below. So we are talking about the respiratory system, so we will stay in the respiratory system. So the pharynx is a muscular tube and extends from the nasal cavity above and the larynx below. And the pharynx has 3 parts. The upper part is the nasopharynx, middle part is the oropharynx, and lower part is the laryngopharynx. Nasopharynx, since the pharynx starts from the nose, right? Nasal cavity, that's why the upper part is nasopharynx. Then middle part is located behind the oral cavity. If you go behind the oral cavity, the part of the pharynx, that is the oropharynx. That's why it is called oropharynx, behind the oral cavity. And then laryngopharynx is attached to the larynx, because we know that the larynx starts from the lower end of the pharynx. So the lower part of the pharynx is attached to the larynx. That's why that part is the laryngopharynx. Okay, so 3 parts. Behind the nose you have nasopharynx, behind the mouth you have oropharynx, and then the part is attached to the larynx, that's the laryngopharynx. So you see by 3 different colors they have shown those 3 parts. This is the nasal cavity, and behind that is nasopharynx, then behind the oral cavity you have oropharynx, and this is the laryngopharynx. And from the lower end of laryngopharynx, the next part part of the respiratory system, that's the larynx. Larynx starts, and this is the esophagus. Okay, so from the lower end, the larynx, which is the part of the respiratory system, and esophagus, which is the part of the digestive system, start. Those two parts start from the lower end of the pharynx.
When somebody chokes, where does it usually, how far does it get? Or can it go down pretty far? Or is it usually just at the top of the first thing?
I think if it enters into the larynx.
The larynx,
Yeah.
you're in trouble.
Okay. It should not go that low, right?
But it shouldn't be in the larynx at all, correct? Because there's the, what is that, the epiglottis that will shut
Oh,
and keeps the air tubes with air, and then your esophagus with food.
yeah, but
So if it blocks the
accidentally,
airway, yeah,
the
is it kinda-
epiglottis covers the entrance of the larynx.
Yes.
The entrance of the larynx is covered with epiglottis, right? But if, for example, you are talking and eating at the same time, to talk, your respiratory system should be open.
Okay, so it will actually, or could potentially enter
Enter
into
into the larynx.
the larynx. It's
Yes.
not there at the valve. It's actually into the tube.
No, normally it should keep the larynx closed, right?
Correct.
Now, if accidentally, like when you are talking, your respiratory passage is open, right? You need air to talk from the lung.
Yes.
So the epiglottis should be open,
Okay.
right? So food can
Okay.
enter into the larynx
Okay.
too. And if accidentally the food enters into the larynx, that will cause you that fever problem. So normally the food or food particles should not enter into the larynx because larynx is covered by epiglottis. Make sense? Okay. So if some food particle enter into the larynx, that will cause the problem.
You can get pneumonia, correct? My mom had a stroke, so that she gets pneumonia on the ground.
Yes, if food goes in, then the chance of infection is more because that food easily gets bacteria, virus, right? In your digestive system, inside your digestive system, you have strong acidic secretion. So that will kill the microorganisms, right? But inside your respiratory system, you don't have the acids. So the infection will grow there.
Professor, if it actually makes it into the larynx, when you do like the Heimlich procedure, for example, to clear a blocked air passage, I mean, it's not going to come out the larynx past the valve and then out the mouth, is it? I mean, how, because the epiglottis, it only opens one way, correct?
Yes.
So, yeah, it's just going to go down into your lungs?
When you do the procedure, I mean, you...
Or, I mean, how, I think maybe I'm getting too technical.
No, we put the rice tube that is to give the food through the nose, okay?
Yes.
To give the food through the nose. To clean the lower part of the respiratory tract, like trachea or bronchi, we will make hole here,
Okay.
okay? And then pass through that, because this is trachea here.
Yes.
Epiglottis, it is difficult to go through the epiglottis, but there must be some procedure, I don't know. But you have to open the epiglottis. But if you go through here, that is easy, you don't need to open the epiglottis. That is tracheotomy, we use that. Okay, so the pharynx has three parts. Nasopharynx is the uppermost part, posterior to the nasal cavity. The lining is pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. And remember, the upper part of the respiratory system has pseudostratified ciliated epithelial lining, pseudostratified ciliated columnar lining in the upper part of the respiratory tract or system. Soft palate the nasopharynx during swallowing. Okay, so when you swallow the food, the soft palate and uvula will move up to prevent the food from entering inside your nose, nasal cavity. Make sense? If the food enters into your nasal cavity, you know that nasal cavity is very sensitive, highly sensitive, right? Many nerve endings are there. So that will cause sneezing and other irritations. So the soft palate and uvula will move up to close the nasopharynx during the swallowing. Pharyngeal tonsil, also called adenoid tonsils, are attached to the posterior wall of the pharynx, and pharyngotympanic tube, which is also called the auditory tube, opens in the lateral wall of nasopharynx. So nasopharynx has two important structures. What are those? The pharyngeal tonsils are attached to the posterior wall, and pharyngotympanic tube or auditory tube, which is a tube, and one end of the tube opens in the lateral wall of the nasopharynx. Okay, the other end is where?
Posterior wall.
Auditory?
Auditory tube.
Yes.
One end is in your nasopharynx, right?
Right.
One end in the nasopharynx. The other end is in the ear. Which ear?
Inner.
Middle ear. Middle ear. Okay, so the auditory tube connects the nasopharynx and middle ear. Okay, and I told you before that in small kids the head is small, right? So the tube will be short as well as more vertical, because nose and ear are not far this way, not too far. As your head grows, they go far, right? So the tube becomes longer and vertical. In big head, the tube is longer because the distance from your nasopharynx and ear is more, and also more vertical. In small kids, more horizontal and short. So that's why the kids get more ear infections, because from the nose, the fluid can easily enter into the middle ear and cause the infection of the ears. Oropharynx. So oropharynx is common passage for food and air. So both food and air pass through the oropharynx. You know that from your mouth the food enters into the oropharynx, and from your nasopharynx the air goes down into the oropharynx. Palatine tonsils. Lining, again, I said you that upper part of the respiratory tract is lined with pseudostratified ciliated columnar. Here. This is interesting. The oropharynx part is lined with stratified squamous. The reason is, you know that the area where the chance of friction is more, that area is lined with stratified squamous. Do you remember that? I told you that the areas in our body where the chance of friction is more, those areas are lined with what? Stratified squamous, remember. So the food, since the food passes through the oropharynx, that part of your pharynx is lined with the stratified squamous. So that is interesting. Okay? Palatine tonsils in the lateral wall of oropharynx, and lingual tonsils on the posterior surface of the tongue. So those two sets of tonsils, palatine and lingual. Lingual indicates the tongue. So we know the tongue is in the oral cavity. So those two sets of tonsils are present in the oropharynx. Laryngopharynx is the passageway for both food and air. Only the nasopharynx is the passage for the air, no food, okay, through the nasopharynx. But other two parts of pharynx are common for both food and air. Okay, just know that. And the lower end, from the lower end of laryngopharynx, the larynx and esophagus starts. So again, now you see more detail. This is the nasopharynx, and this is the pharyngeal tonsil attached to the posterior wall of the nasopharynx. Okay, and here is the opening of the auditory tube, also called pharyngotympanic tube. Okay, so those two things are important here in nasopharynx, and the lining is pseudostratified ciliated column. Okay, then this part is the oropharynx, which is lined with what type of epithelial tissue? Epithelial lining, stratified squamous. Remember, because food, it is common passage for food, and here food will enter from the oral cavity, and air will enter from the nasopharynx. Okay, so this is common, and we see the palatine tonsil attached to the soft palate is located in this part, as well as the lingual tonsil. Okay, the back of the tongue. This is the lingual tonsil, this is the palatine tonsil. Those are in the oropharynx. And then the laryngopharynx is this part, and from the lower end of laryngopharynx you have esophagus that continues as esophagus, and the front, the larynx. Okay, and now two important structures here you see, they prevent the food from entering into certain areas. This is the soft palate, and the end of the soft palate, posterior end, is called uvula. So this is the uvula, and this is the soft palate. Okay, and when you swallow the food, the soft palate and uvula will move up. As I told you, it will move up. That will prevent the food from entering into the nasal cavity. Excellent. That is very important, because we don't want the food to go up and enter into the nasal cavity. We want the food to go down, right? So that's why the soft palate and uvula will move up. And another structure here, you see this is the epiglottis. It is a cartilaginous structure, and the epiglottis, when you swallow the food, will move down to cover the larynx. Entrance of the larynx will be covered, or opening of the larynx will be covered. So the food will enter where? Into the esophagus. Food will not enter into the larynx, and food is not supposed to enter into the respiratory tract, into the larynx. That's why the epiglottis will move down to cover the opening of the larynx. Next to pharynx is the larynx. Larynx is mainly formed by cartilages. Okay, what type of cartilages? Hyaline cartilages form the most of the structures of the larynx, except the epiglottis. Epiglottis is formed by elastic cartilage. Remember, epiglottis is elastic cartilage. Other cartilages are formed by hyaline cartilage. So what are the cartilages present in the larynx? Larynx is a cartilaginous structure, and what are the cartilages? The largest cartilage of the larynx is thyroid cartilage. So thyroid cartilage is the largest one. Okay, and that is the Adam's apple, or laryngeal prominence. You know that it is a secondary sex characteristics for male, right? The laryngeal prominence, that is given by the thyroid cartilage. Then second largest laryngeal cartilage is the cricoid cartilage. So cricoid is the second largest one, and then other small cartilages of larynx are paired of arytenoid, cuneiform, and corniculate. Those are 2 in number, and they are small cartilages. And epiglottis is formed by elastic cartilage that covers the laryngeal inlet or opening during the swallowing. So here, this is the structure of a larynx. You see those cartilages. This is the thyroid cartilage, the largest one. This is the cricoid, and then this is trachea. Okay, so this is not the part of it. And that is the epiglottis. You can see. Now you see a couple of connective tissue structures, ligaments and membranes. So this is the hyoid bone. You all know that, the floating bone. This is the lonely bone of the body. So the membrane, connective tissue membrane that connects the hyoid and thyroid cartilage. Hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage, that is called thyrohyoid. Makes sense? Thyrohyoid connects the thyroid cartilage and hyoid bone. Okay, so thyrohyoid membrane, and then the ligament that connects the thyroid cartilage and cricoid cartilage, that is called cricothyroid ligament. Starting from the lower one, cricothyroid, thyrohyoid. Okay, so those are the connective tissue structures present in the larynx. Okay. Inner lining of the larynx is pseudostratified ciliated. Again, because food is not passing through that, right? So no food, no friction. So inner lining is pseudostratified ciliated. Only the part where the food passes through, those parts have the stratified squamous. You can see the larynx from inside. So you can see other small cartilages, adenoid cartilage, orniculate cartilage, and cuneiform cartilage. Those are two in number. Each of those are two in number. And then this is the thyroid cartilage, this is the cricoid cartilage. So this is the larynx. Okay? Epiglottis is this one. Okay. Inside the larynx, we have an important structure, that is the vocal cord or vocal folds. And the opening, we have two vocal folds, and from the sides two, and there is an opening in between, and that opening is called the glottis. So glottis is nothing, just the opening in between the vocal folds or vocal cords. Okay, and you all know that the vibration of vocal folds or cords produce the sound, right? Produce the sound. So when we produce the sound, what we do? We can adjust the vocal folds, and then we exhale the air from our lungs, and that air will hit the vocal folds. When the air will come out, it will hit the vocal folds, and vocal folds will start to vibrate. Okay, and by the vibration of vocal fold, we produce the sound, and that is the basic sound. All of us will produce that basic sound. Same. Then what happens? That sound enters into your mouth, right? Enters into your mouth, and then we modulate that sound. And that is the language. We speak differently, right? The pronunciation or the sound we produce different race to race or nation to nation, right? The reason is the basic sound is same. That sound we produce with our vocal folds, that is same. Basic, like oh, that kind of sound. Then we modulate with our structures of the mouth, like your tongue, your teeth, right? Other structures modulate the sound. That is the learning process. We learn from the childhood how to move the tongue or other structures. So you see the vocal folds, two vocal folds. Just notice these are the vocal folds, and this is the closed. Glottis is closed, and here the glottis is open. So glottis is the opening between the vocal folds. Okay, the last structure we talk today is the trachea. The trachea is also called the air tube. As I have mentioned, air tube is the trachea, and trachea is mainly a cartilaginous structure or tube. So, a type of cartilage, hyaline cartilage. And also, we have smooth muscle tissue in the trachea. So, trachea is mainly a cartilaginous structure, but also we have a smooth muscle in the trachea, and if you see the wall of the trachea, it has three layers. Innermost layer is the mucosa that has pseudostratified ciliated again columnar epithelium, and then next layer is the submucosa, and submucosa is a connective tissue layer with seromucous glands. Serous and mucus glands are present in the submucosa of the trachea. Two types of glands. What two types of glands? Serous glands and mucus glands. And they will secrete the serous, watery fluid, and mucus, the sticky fluid. Okay? So those glands are also present in the nasal cavity. Remember when we talked about the nasal cavity, the serous and mucus secretion? Those are the glands in the submucosa. And the outermost layer is the adventitia. It is a connective tissue layer in which the tracheal cartilages, those are C-shaped cartilages, not complete circle. Okay? So in the trachea, you have the cartilages like this, but those cartilages are not complete circle, like C-shaped cartilage. So this is the cartilage. This is another cartilage. Okay. Now the two ends of the cartilage is connected by smooth muscle. That's why I said that trachea has a smooth muscle too, mainly cartilage, but a smooth muscle too. So this is the cartilage, and this is the smooth muscle. Smooth muscle. This is hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage. Okay. So that's the structure of the trachea. And that smooth muscle is called trachealis muscle. So the smooth muscle in the back of the trachea that connects the cartilages, ends of cartilages, that's the trachealis muscle. Another, my favorite thing I may ask in the test, that carina. What is that? Carina is the last piece of tracheal cartilage, the lowest one, the last one. And that is the point where the trachea divides into right and left bronchi. You know that lower end of trachea divides into right and left bronchi, right? And the carina is the last piece of cartilage. So that is the location where the trachea divides. Here you see those three layers of trachea. In this picture they have shown the trachea as well as the esophagus. We won't focus on esophagus. We will only see the trachea. And you see it has three layers. Innermost is the mucosa, and then submucosa that contains the seromucous glands, and then the adventitia that contains the hyaline cartilage, tracheal cartilages. This is the real picture of the wall of the trachea. So you see those three layers. Innermost mucosa has pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. You see the cilia, hair-like structure. And then the submucosa contains the seromucous gland, like white egg-shaped glands. Those are the seromucous glands, and then hyaline cartilage in the adventitia. Okay. Okay. So let's stop here and move further. Do you have any question?